Welcome back, everyone, to another reaction video. Well, there are moments in history where in a single decision, a single event, may be seemingly insignificant at the time, or at the time it's known as something significant. Either way, they can completely change the trajectory of history after that. And this video is going to cover some of that topic. This is a video from The Paint Explainer. It's called Deaths That Changed History the Most. Now, I've got a few ideas in my mind of what I think should be in this video. And it looks like as I'm looking at it, he's got some on the screen here, and I would definitely agree with some. There's one or two that I'm not real familiar with enough to be able to say, but then there's a few that I notice I think should be there that aren't. So it'll be a good topic of conversation for us, and at the end you can let me know in the comment section what you think should be there, what you think he mentioned that shouldn't have been. It's a great topic, something for us to talk about in the comment section below. I'll also pin in the comment section below a playlist to all of my reactions I've done to The Paint Explainer. We've done quite a few, so check those out. Let's dive in.
Tsar Nicholas II. In the middle of the night, Nicholas, his family, and a few loyal servants were woken up and told they were being moved for their safety. Instead, they were taken to a basement. There, a Bolshevik officer named Yakov Yurovsky told them they were going to be executed.
So a little context here. At this point, the Tsar has already been overthrown. He's been out of power for like a year. This is 1918. What's going on now is that there is a civil war in the aftermath of his deposition, where you have fighting over who's going to rule the former Russian Empire. And as forces are getting closer to Ekaterinburg, which is where the Tsar and his family are being held, there's concern that they could get him back and that then he could maybe be put back on the throne. And so that's why they make this split decision to execute him.
Bolsheviks wanted to make sure the monarchy could never return and to show that the old way of ruling Russia was finished. They claimed the execution was justice for the suffering the Russian people had experienced under Nicholas's rule.
Yeah, it was flat out murder.
Death became a turning point in history as it ended the era of the Russian Empire and cleared the way for the Soviet Union to take power in 1922.
So the only thing I would say about this is, since he had already been overthrown, I'm not sure his death had as much impact as it would have if he was still in power, if he was still the Tsar when he was killed. Then you might have a point, but you can also look at it from the standpoint that as long as he was alive, there was a chance he came back to the throne. Incidentally, kind of a cool side note to this story, their bodies were eventually discovered decades later in the forests in and around Ekaterinburg. And one of the ways in which they were able to prove that they were, in fact, the Tsar and his family was DNA from the Duke of Edinburgh, Prince Philip, Queen Elizabeth II's husband, because he shared mitochondrial DNA with that family. And so they were able to use his mitochondrial DNA as a way of matching with them.
With the monarchy eliminated, there was no figure left for a constitutional monarchy, the same system in place in the UK today. Some historians believe this path might still have been possible if Nicholas had survived.
It's possible,
Instead,
yeah.
His removal created a power vacuum that allowed the Bolsheviks to build a one-party communist state, first under Lenin and later under Stalin. This led to the rise of a regime that would define Russian politics for decades, having huge consequences on World War II and the Cold War. Atahualpa.
Yeah, so I would agree from the standpoint that if his death made it more likely for the Soviet Union to rise out of that power vacuum, then yes, because obviously the rise of the Soviet Union is one of the dominant forces of the 20th century and everything that comes afterwards.
In 1532, the Spanish, led by Francisco Pizarro, invited Atahualpa to a meeting, but it was a trap. He was captured during a surprise attack. To gain his freedom, Atahualpa promised a huge ransom of gold and silver, but after the Spanish collected the treasure, they put him through a fake trial and killed him by strangulation in 1533. His death left a power gap in the Inca leadership, making it impossible for the empire to organize a strong defense. The Spanish installed puppet rulers like Tupac Hualpa and later Manco Inca, but they had little real power. Their efforts to fight back eventually failed.
So this one here, I don't know enough about it to say for sure, but I feel like the Spanish domination of the Incan Empire was inevitable regardless of who was on the throne. But if there could have been a more organized defense against that, then maybe looks different.
Atahualpa's death allowed the Spanish to quickly take control of the Andes and start their rule over the region. The gold and silver taken from his ransom also helped fund Spain's empire. At the same time, legends began to spread among the indigenous people, like the Incari myth that said Atahualpa would one day return to free his people. But in reality, his death ended the last real chance for the Inca Empire to survive. Mohammad Reza Pahlavi.
Oh, the Shah.
Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, the last Shah of Iran, died in exile in Egypt in 1980 after a surgery went wrong and caused a deadly infection. He had been forced to leave Iran after the 1979 Iranian Revolution because many people were unhappy with his rule. They criticized his dictatorship, economic problems, human rights abuses, forced Western-style changes, and his close relationship with the United States, with many thinking he was a USA puppet. People also grew angry at his extravagant spending, harsh secret police, the SAVAK, the banning of all political parties except one, and his efforts to reduce the influence of Islam. After the revolution, Iran became an Islamic republic led by Ayatollah Khomeini. Attila the Hun.
Yeah, that's an excellent point there because, again, this is very similar to what we talked about previously, which is as long as, even though he's overthrown, as long as he's out there, he's a rallying point. And this is all throughout history, it's this way. As long as the overthrown ruler lives, he's a rallying point for the opposition of whoever takes his place. That's why very often in history we see that overthrown monarchs get executed, because they don't want that to be an alternative for the people under the new regime. So yeah, I can see that being the case.
Hun. Attila the Hun's invasion of Italy in 452 had important effects. He destroyed cities like Aquileia and got close to Rome, which caused panic and forced many people to flee. Some escaped to the Venetian lagoon, where the city of Venice would later be founded. Attila's advance stopped near the River Po, probably because of problems like famine, disease, and lack of supplies. Roman Emperor Valentinian III sent a group of negotiators, including Pope Leo I, to talk with Attila. He agreed to leave, possibly because of pressure from the Eastern Roman Empire and fear of bad omens or signs. But in 453, after celebrating a new marriage, Attila died suddenly, likely from internal bleeding or a nosebleed while drunk, although some later stories claimed he was murdered. His death stopped the Huns' expansion and led to a fight for power among his...
So the stories about him being murdered versus him dying of some natural cause, that's another common theme throughout history, right? And we've seen that again recently with current events, is that whenever somebody of great influence or great power dies suddenly or dies under mysterious or questionable circumstances, the conspiracy theories start, right? JFK is a great example from the 20th century, but there have been many more of those. Was he murdered? Was there some nefarious cause? Or was it just random chance? We always want to believe that there's some great deep conspiracy behind powerful and influential people dying rather than it was just random or a single person took it upon themselves. That goes back throughout history, as we can see.
Sons. They split the empire, which led to uprisings from groups the Huns had ruled. In 454, the Huns were defeated at the Battle of Nidau, where Attila's oldest son, Elac, was killed. Later defeats, including a failed invasion in 468 and the death of his son Dengizich, ended the Hunnic Empire. Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great died suddenly in Babylon in 323 BC at the age of 32, and his death caused immediate chaos because he left no clear successor. His only son, Alexander IV, was born after he died, and his half-brother, Philip Aridius, was seen as unfit to rule. This led to a power struggle among his top generals, known as the Diadochi. They divided the empire into regions called satrapies, but these soon became independent kingdoms. A short attempt to keep the empire united failed when the regent Perdiccas was assassinated in 321 BC. This
is one of those great examples. I mean, Genghis Khan's another one, where you have this leader who conquers a lot of territory, and then within a generation or two, Charlemagne's another one, within a generation or two or three, the whole thing falls apart because it was built so suddenly. What we see lasting more is something like the Roman Empire, where it was built slowly and integrated over generations. When you have a massive conquest quickly under a very charismatic and a very capable ruler, it often flames out just as quickly.
set off 40 years of wars between the generals. In the end, the empire broke into three main Hellenistic kingdoms: the Ptolemaic kingdom in Egypt, the Seleucid Empire in Asia, and the Antigonid kingdom in Macedonia. Alexander had left behind big plans, such as conquering Arabia, building massive temples and cities, and uniting Eastern and Western peoples. But after his death, these ideas seemed impossible to realize. Basically, his death gave rise to the Hellenistic world, where his former generals ruled powerful kingdoms that shaped the Mediterranean and the Middle East for centuries.
I would argue that this is one of the ones that has to be at the top of the list because he was so young and he had done so much in a short amount of time. How much more could he have done, or would it have continued at that rate, or would we have seen a decline and then maybe we don't remember Alexander the Great as in the way that we do? Would Rome have risen the way that it did in the centuries that followed? There's a lot of what ifs about that one. I'd be curious to know what you guys think. Let me know.
Genghis Khan. Genghis Khan, the founder of the Mongol Empire, died in 1227, and before his death, he chose his third son Ogedei as successor due to his balanced leadership style. After Genghis Khan died,
balanced leadership vibes. I like that.
The Mongol Empire slowly began to break apart over the following decades. This happened because there was no clear system for choosing future leaders. Although Genghis had named his son Ogedei as the next great Khan, he also gave large areas of land to his other sons. These lands, called appanages, were ruled almost like independent kingdoms. This system worked while Genghis and Ogedei were alive and strong leaders. But after their deaths, competition between different family branches grew. Eventually, the empire split into four major parts, or khanats. Sometimes, they even fought each other. This division made the Mongol Empire weaker and more open to attacks. Because of this, the Pax Mongolica, a time of peace, trade, and cultural exchange across much of Eurasia, came to an end. Over time, the former Mongol lands were taken over by new powers like the Ming Dynasty in China, the Ottoman Empire, and Muscovy in Russia. Moctezuma II. When the Spanish...
there's not a lot I can add to that. I already touched on Genghis Khan a little bit. I think a lot of people would agree that that's an interesting what-if as well. Of course, it didn't have kind of the internal strong structure that many of the further west empires did, but you never know.
Led by Hernan Cortés, arrived in the Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan in 1519. Moctezuma was taken prisoner. This took away his real power, even though he still appeared to be the ruler. The Spanish treated him with respect in public, but used him to control the Aztec people and prevent them from rebelling. His continued support for the Spanish, whether because he was scared or forced, caused many of his own people to turn against him. In 1520, while trying to calm a large public protest that had started after the Spanish killed many people during Cortés's absence, Moctezuma was killed. Some say he was hit by stones or arrows thrown by angry Aztecs, while others say he was killed by the Spanish. His death ended any hope of peaceful cooperation between the Spanish and the Aztecs. After Moctezuma died, his brother Cuitlahuac became emperor, but died soon after from smallpox. Then Cuauhtémoc became leader and led the final fight to defend the empire. Within a year, the Aztec Empire fell to the Spanish.
So this is another one that I kind of file in the category of I don't know that long-term it changed anything because I think the Spanish conquest was inevitable, regardless of how it all went down. But those of you who know more about kind of this time period in American history can maybe speak to it better than I can.
Moctezuma's death was basically the final loss of Aztec independence and the start of Spanish colonial rule in Mexico, with all the consequences this had in history. Arthur Tudor. Prince Arthur, the oldest son of King Henry VII and the heir to the English throne, died suddenly in April 1502 at the age of 15, only a few months after marrying Catherine of Aragon. After he died, Catherine married his younger brother, Henry VIII, but when they couldn't have a male heir, Henry asked the Pope to cancel the marriage, saying it was invalid because she had been married to Arthur first. The Pope, Clement VII, refused, and this led Henry to break away from the Catholic Church and start the Church of England, beginning the English Reformation. The religious disagreements that came out of this made divisions in society worse and helped lead to the English Civil War.
100% agree with all of that. Prince Arthur's death is a huge turning point in Western European history for all the reasons he just mentioned. I mean, think about the ramifications of Henry VIII becoming king. And early on, he's a fairly good king. He's likable, he's handsome, he's not the big fat slob tyrant that everybody thinks of. He had some things happen that I think directly led to some bad mental health in his life. And so had none of that happened, had Arthur stayed king, and he, by all accounts, was a pretty even-keeled guy, Of course, we don't know how that would have all gone down, but all of history after that changes. What if England stays Catholic? You don't have the suppression of the and the dissolution of the monasteries, and so much history that was lost because of that. You don't have a powerful opposition to the likes of Spain down the road, and the Spanish Armada and all of that entails. Maybe Spain remains the dominant power in the New World if and when it's discovered the way that it was. There's so many ways in which history could have been different because of this.
Charles the Bold. Charles the Bold,
Yeah.
Duke of Burgundy, ruled one of the most powerful states in Western Europe during the 14th and 15th centuries. He was close to uniting the Low Countries, what we now call Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg, for the first time in
Benelux.
history. Although Burgundy was still officially under the authority of both the King of France and the Holy Roman Emperor, it had grown strong enough to possibly break away and become an independent kingdom. This new kingdom
I had to pause for a second there because he showed Frederick III, who was a German emperor in the 19th century. And I'm not entirely sure why, because we're talking about Charles the Bold, who was in the 15th century. Anyway.
It had grown strong enough to possibly break away and become an independent kingdom. This new kingdom would have been a powerful state located between France and Germany, but in 1477, while fighting in Lorraine to capture one of the last remaining territories he needed, Charles was killed by Swiss mercenaries. Since he had no male heir, his lands were inherited by his daughter, Mary of Burgundy.
So this is all happening at right around the same time that the end of the Wars of the Roses is happening in England. Where eventually you're going to have the Tudors come out on top in the 1480s. And one of the things that England is trying to do, with France being a major rival, is that Burgundy becomes kind of this potential ally against France, and they kind of play against each other. And so Charles the Bold, not being able to make Burgundy this powerful alternative to France on the continent, kind of shakes things up even for England.
Her inheritance made her the most desirable bride in Europe at the time. She married Maximilian of Habsburg, and this marriage changed European history.
I feel like he's just just a little bit sloppy here.
At the time, she married Maximilian.
That Maximilian, who was a member of the Habsburg family, is the one who was the brother of Franz Joseph, who was executed after being overthrown as Emperor of Mexico, again in the 19th century. There was a marriage that Mary of Burgundy did marry a man named Maximilian, who became the Holy Roman Emperor, but again, that was in the 15th century, not this guy.
Of Habsburg, and this marriage changed European history. It gave the Habsburg family control over Burgundy's wealthy lands, which helped them grow into one of the most powerful dynasties in Europe. Later, they also inherited Spain, and the money from the Low Countries helped fund their expansion into the Americas. However, Mary's great-grandson, Philip II of Spain, ruled the Low Countries very harshly. His policies caused a major revolt among the local nobles. This led to the northern provinces breaking away and forming the Dutch Republic. If Charles the Bold had lived longer and had a son, the Low Countries might have become a united and independent kingdom a century earlier.
And Belgium doesn't exist until the 1800s also, so I feel like we're doing a lot of mixing up 19th century history and 15th century history here.
Perhaps stayed that way. A strong and independent Burgundy might have become a major European power, like a version of Prussia, but much earlier, changing the course of European politics for centuries.
Certainly possible. You can never say never with that, because at this point, who's thinking Prussia is going to be a major world power, right? Prussia is just one more of all of these broken up kingdoms that are a part of the Holy Roman Empire, and any one of them could have been the one that eventually rose to power. Why not Burgundy?
Henrietta Lacks. Henrietta Lacks was an African-American woman whose cancer cells were taken without her knowledge or permission in 1951. These cells became the first human cells that could live and grow forever outside the body. They were named HeLa and became one of the most important tools in medical research. Thanks to HeLa cells, scientists made major advances, such as developing the polio vaccine, cancer treatments, gene mapping, and research on viruses like HIV and COVID-19. For many years, neither she nor her family knew the cells were being used or that they had become extremely valuable. Her family only found out decades later, which raised serious questions about privacy and the treatment of patients in research.
Yeah.
In 2013, the U.S. National Institutes of Health made a deal with her family to give them some control over who can access the genetic data from HeLa cells. Her case has also led to lawsuits and new laws. Pope Gregory XI.
All true. It's a fascinating story, and it's probably worth a separate video about at some point. If you know of any that are out there, let me know.
In 1377, Pope Gregory XI brought the papacy back to Rome after nearly 70 years of being based in Avignon, France.
Yeah.
This move ended a long period of French control over the Catholic Church, but it also caused serious problems in Italy. Gregory appointed many French officials to rule Italian lands, which made people in cities like Florence very angry. This tension helped start the War of the Eight Saints.
Yeah, remember, this is a really fascinating and crazy time in the history of Italy, and if you ever get the chance to go to Italy, highly recommend it. I've been there twice now, and it's beautiful. The people are great. The history is just mind-blowing. And Florence is one of the most incredible places I've ever been. But there were all of these republics and all of these kind of city-states, and they were all vying for influence over the church and over the papacy. And then you had other nations like France who were trying to do the same. And it's just a hodgepodge of just craziness going on all over Europe at that point.
From 1375 to 1378. However, Gregory died in 1378, not long after arriving. His death led to a major crisis after the church elected Urban VI, an Italian, as pope. That's because many cardinals claimed the election was forced by a threatening Roman crowd. They later chose a second pope, Clement VII, who went back to Avignon. But this created a split in the Catholic Church, with different countries supporting different popes. This division, known as the Western Schism, lasted for nearly 40 years. In 1409, a third group tried to solve the problem at the Council of Pisa by electing a new pope, but that only made things worse. Now there were three competing popes. The conflict finally ended at the Council of Constance, where all rival popes were removed or made to resign. A new pope,
Just get rid of all of them and pick somebody new. That's really the only way you could handle that.
Martin V, was then elected to lead the church alone. But the long schism hurt the church's image and authority, helping inspire future reform ideas like conciliarism and eventually the Protestant Reformation. Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar's
So I had a list of a couple that I was thinking of myself that if he didn't cover, I would talk about, and Julius Caesar is one of the ones on my list.
assassination in 44 BC marked the end of the Roman Republic. The senators who killed him, led by Brutus and Cassius, thought they were saving the Republic by removing a leader who had gained too much power.
Isn't it fascinating that in destroying who they saw as a tyrant, they actually created the conditions in which the Republic became an empire?
But their plan backfired. After Caesar's funeral, the Roman people were deeply moved, especially by Mark Antony's speech.
Such an incredible time in history, and oh my gosh, how we were robbed of one of the greatest television shows of all time if HBO's Rome had been able to go on for more than 2 seasons. They had a whole thing planned where they were going to cover like the Maccabean revolt in Judea, and they had introduced the character of Herod, and they had all these great stories they were going to tell. And we were robbed of that because, man, what a great show.
Public opinion against the assassins. The killers had to flee, and instead of restoring the Republic, Caesar's death led to more violence and a series of civil wars. His adopted heir, Octavian, eventually defeated all his enemies and became the sole ruler of Rome. He later took the title Augustus and became the first Roman emperor. This marked the shift from a republic, where power was shared, to an official empire ruled by one man.
Although, I don't know if I would say official empire, because if you were to ask Augustus, he would say, no, we're still a republic, and I'm just the chief citizen of that republic. They had kind of this twisted view of exactly what they were doing to try and make it more palatable to the Roman people.
Archduke Franz Ferdinand.
Yes.
The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand on June 28, 1914, led to the start of World War I. Austria-Hungary blamed Serbia for the killing and sent an ultimatum. When Serbia didn't agree to all the demands, Austria-Hungary
they agreed to like 9.5 of the 10. Not good enough.
declared war. Because of alliances between countries, what started as a local conflict quickly turned into a global war. Germany supported Austria-Hungary, while Russia, France, and later Britain supported Serbia. The result was 4 years of massive destruction, with over 16 million people killed. The war also caused the collapse of 4 major empires: the Austro-Hungarian, Ottoman, German, and Russian. When the war ended, borders were redrawn across Europe and the Middle East. Germany was punished harshly in the...
Now, that wasn't the German flag that was used at the time. But anyway, I paused it on an image that includes Woodrow Wilson. Oh, anyway, I guess we'll survive this. There he is right there. Now, a lot of people have argued, and I can see the argument that, well, the war would have happened anyway. If it hadn't been the assassination of Franz Ferdinand, it would have been something else. And that's certainly possible, but it might not have looked like it did. I mean, if you study, and we've done a series on this, if you study the diplomatic failures that happened in the aftermath of the assassination that led up to the war, starting at the end of July, there were so many moments that things could have been turned around and they could have come back from the brink. And so if the circumstances had been different, maybe it doesn't look like it does. So I'm willing to say, yes, this should be here because it did, in fact, lead to the crisis that led to World War I.
Treaty of Versailles, which created deep resentment and helped lead to the rise of fascism and World War II. If you like this...
All right, I would definitely add Abraham Lincoln to this list because the timing of his death and the man who replaced him, Andrew Johnson, being a Southern kind of more pro-slavery Democrat, had massive consequences for the future of the newly freed slaves, the 4 million people who had been enslaved, and really created the conditions for Jim Crow and for the next 100+ years of segregation and discrimination and everything that came along with that. I think in American history, there's never been a death that has been so harmful to our history as that of Abraham Lincoln. So I would definitely add him. Who else should be on the list? Let me know in the comment section below. Thanks for watching.